think, oh my God, we really should be at that meeting, not at field day. Well, you know what? Actually, if that's your choice and you need to make it, the people with whom you work, to whom you are indispensable, they'll go, great. If we'll cover her because this is what she needs to do now.
No one ever really remembers you missing.
No, not at all. But my son to this day, my son works at Google, he's 37. And if you ask him, he will say, I never missed a field day. Ever. He would never have forgotten if I hadn't come to field day. But the meetings and stuff, there. Now, do you remember who was in a meeting 3 weeks ago? So the other thing is to measure outcomes. Think of everything in terms of outcomes. What's the outcome of my not going to this meeting? What's the outcome of my not going to school play? And it's easier to make decisions if you think about outcomes. And that's one of the things I always do too.
So another question that came up on the Twitter feed, and this is sort of going back to what you said about David and him really putting the importance in people. How hard is it to inspire over 18,000 employees like you had to do in your tenure as Chairman and CEO?
Well, it's hard. It's a full-time job. I'll tell you that. It's but we're big communicators. You know, sometimes I always say to clients, the last audience for most clients is the internal audience. They forget about them all the time. So one of the jobs that I've always done as a partner to a client is to continue to remind them how important the internal audience is. Because if they don't believe, nobody's going to believe. And they're the best ambassadors, the best missionaries. So you can't communicate too much with 18,000 people. And you've got to be clear in your communication. You have to remind everyone all the time of what the mission is, what the values are, and also the people in an organization will judge you not just by what you say, but what you do. And so you've got to live the words. Right. You gotta walk the walk. Right. You gotta walk the talk. And you have to be true to a set of principles and a set of values. You also have to show up. You know, it's great that we have so much electronic media. It's fabulous. It's very seductive to think, well, I'll just go on the webcast and talk to the people in China. Well, yes, you can do that. But once in a while, you have to show up. Because it's amazing what happens when you have dinner with people with whom you work. You have dinner with your partners. When you share a coffee in the morning. When you ride in a van with them to some event. And you just have to touch people actually and not just virtually. And I think that's one of the things I worry about. That we're so busy tweeting and texting and webcasting and all that we forget that touching people really is very, very important.
I think that's a good point. I also think there was a lot, I always felt like you were still very accessible. And yes, I was fortunate enough to work with you on your business and other things, but you walked around the office, people saw you, you didn't just duck into your office and then come out. It felt like you were really there. And people could feel that, which I think.
Go to the ladies' room. I hate these people have their own bathrooms, It's just like, you find out more things in the ladies' room than go to the cafeteria. Because you're just standing online. It's amazing what you can learn.
So another Ogilvy, not urban legend, but legend story that I think people that come into work there hear a lot about is, let's go back to 1994, I believe it was, when IBM decided to consolidate their, 100 and some agencies with Ogilvy. Why do you think we see less and less of that now? Why do you think there's been this sort of shift now into clients being a bit promiscuous again, having 45, 50 different agencies?
Well, I think part of it is that as all these new media, new opportunities have come forward, there are lots of clients who believe that you need experts in all these different activities. And the more you break it up, it's reasonable, right? The more you break it up, the more ideas you get. But I guess the answer is we haven't really proven the value over and over again of what it is to have everything integrated by an idea. And have used the brand as an organizing principle for so much of what goes on in these very complex companies that are very difficult to understand. So I think it's just a different approach and a different set of experiences. We want IBM and large part because of the work we had done for American Express. And a lot of the clients from American Express went to IBM. And from a company, American Express, and a brand that is so cohesive and so well understood and so important to driving the business forward at American Express, they found themselves in IBM where they had, 100 different advertising budgets and different names and all that. So their first instinct, based on their experience, was to aggregate all the effort and unify it behind one brand, which was IBM.
Yeah, because I think you raise a good point with the experts and clients feeling like, oh no, there's no way they can be mobile experts and social experts and have good insight departments and I think oftentimes that's not even necessarily the case. It's just sort of the way they've been wired and the things that they're hearing from agencies that specialize in just one or the other. So on that point, what do you think has really changed the most since you started out in the industry 40 years ago? Or does everything really feel, yes, there's been changes, but everything still really feels the same?
Well, there's been enormous change. I mean, yes, and yes.
Yes.
There's been enormous change because of the change in technology, the change in media, the change in the way people get their information, where they choose to get their content. But what hasn't changed is the value of a brand. What hasn't changed is the power of a brand and its ability to bring everything in a company together. And we just now have more places to express it, which is pretty interesting and exciting. There are more, when I was in direct marketing for a few years. Actually, part of the legend is that I grew up in direct marketing. That's not true at all. I grew up in advertising, but since I spent 3 years there, it seems like I grew up there for some reason. But everything we did in direct marketing was to simulate real interaction with the customer. And so everything we did was to say, imagine if you could actually talk to someone in real time, and they could answer and you could talk back, a customer or a prospect. Well, now we can. It's amazing to be able to do that. Of course, part of the way we respond is by doing small space print ads, which is madness to me. We haven't figured out how to use the interactivity that is now ours in a way that actually is a dialogue, is a conversation, where you can actually close the sale in the conversation. You don't have to send people an application form, have them send it back through the mail and all that. It's amazing that you can do that now. And yet, I would say to all of us that we have not yet figured out how to take advantage of what is extraordinary opportunity in our time.
So getting back to my story about you coming in and making it look so simple when we had to pitch, God bless them, Walmart or any other big clients that we pitched over the years. I would also, from what I know about you, Shelly, I would also gather that you have to constantly be challenged.
Yes.
And that you stayed in this business because you love it, but you also stayed in this business because that sense of challenge was there time and time again, year after year after year. So what do you think has really kept you challenged this whole time from 40 years ago to sitting here today?
Well, there's always a different marketing problem. There's always a different business problem. And it happens all the time. I got a call this morning from somebody who's heading up an organization where they're trying to create a movement in the United States. They're trying to get the public enraged about something. And so this is a completely, I've had enough experience in general, but this particular set of issues is just fascinating to me. So to be able to take everything we know how to do and make it work, in different places, make it work for different social needs, government needs, clients who are facing new opportunities. It's every minute is new. When you have a client like Sylvia Lagnato, when she was at Unilever, and she says, I know it's just a bar of soap, but I think we can use Dove to actually change the way people in the world think about women. You sit up and go, now there's a challenge. There's something I haven't done for, the last 25 years. But I think part of it is it's incumbent upon us as practitioners to think about these challenges as big new challenges. It might look like if we sell more Dove. Well, let's see if we can elevate it to a bigger question. I always like to say to clients, ask me a bigger question. Ask me a bigger question. Because selling more Barbies, that's easy. Ask me something bigger. Ask me to open the market in China. Ask me something that, something that hasn't been done before that you want for your franchise or for your company. And it's more interesting for me and you and hopefully better for them.
Yeah. And hopefully they have the bigger question.
Hopefully.
Because if they don't, then it's not the most inspiring client. So I just want to take a second and ask you a couple quick personal questions before we open up to the audience. And these are going to be like quick rapid fire, so I'm going to leave you very little time to think of the answer. Favorite shoe brand?
Stuart Weiss.
Favorite vacation spot?
Any place that's sunny with a beach and an ocean.
Any place that's sunny? Are you sure?
Yeah. Well, I Jamaica, Cabo. I like.
Favorite musical artist?
Oh goodness. I can't. We have to come back to that.
Favorite movie?
Rebecca.
Favorite book?
I'm finishing right now Pillars of Stone by Ken Follett. It's fantastic. 970 pages of just a great novel. It's fantastic. But
and Shelly did read the first 50 Shades of Grey. I did ask about it.
I did.
In case anyone had that question in the arsenal, she read the first one and she hasn't read any.
No, I did. I started the second. It was too boring. I did read the first. Hey, listen, when it was spread all over Heathrow Airport, and we're supposed to be au courant with what's going on culturally, I thought I got to give this a try.
Favorite restaurant in Manhattan?
I really like Milos, especially for dinner on a wintry day, because it reminds me of being in Greece. So.
Favorite place to travel for business?
London.
What about London?
I'm just comfortable there. I just love it. I just walking
easy flight.
Okay, so I think we'll take some questions from the audience, and if everyone can just wait until they come around with the mic so we can hear you. Anyone have a question for Shelly? I think there's someone there.
Hi, my name is Adar Marag. I'm actually one of the associates starting at Ogilvy this year. I have a question for you specifically about young people in the business. How can we, as newcomers to the industry, make sure that we are adding value to our teams and really making a meaningful contribution?
Well, I think just the fact that you're asking that question is impressive, actually. But I think just by asking that question directly, is sort of what can I do to help? Because very often people are so busy that, the people you're working with, they're so busy doing what they're doing that it's sometimes hard to give direction and give meaningful assignments to the people who are around them. I used to, my very first job when I was still in business school, I was an intern at General Foods, that's now Kraft. And before I started my job, the assistant and the associate product manager both went on leave. They actually had to go. It was the time of the Vietnam War. They went into the reserve program of the military. So I was now I'd never worked. I was now taking the place of an assistant and an associate product manager at a time when a product was being rolled out across the United States. And so I said, I don't know what I'm doing, I said to the product manager, but I'll pretend. I'll go through the whole day. I'll try to do it all. If 6 o'clock every night, you sit down with me and I'm going to ask you every question I have over the course of the day. And I would walk around with a yellow legal pad and I would just keep writing down. I'd be telling legal stuff. I'd talk to the agency. And then every night at 6 o'clock, I'd go into his office and I'd say, okay, now let's go through this. And it was the greatest tutorial. And you know what he said to me after? He said, no one ever asked me these questions. No one ever sat down with me. So sometimes just pull on somebody and say, I have something to ask you. I want to know why we're doing this. I'm happy to help. I'll do anything, but just tell me why I'm doing this and why it'll make a difference. And say it nice,
I think that's great advice. And I often tell people when I get asked the question, how did you get so far at such a young age? And I always say, I think my naivete really helped.
Yeah, no, it does.
And that's sort of, because now, who knows if somebody else in the company wouldn't have asked those questions, because politically it might not be right, but for you, or for me, being young and eager, we just didn't know any better.
Right.
And it actually ended up...
And it does prove you're interested.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Anyone else?
Oh my God, a shy bunch.
Oh, hello. Hi, Catherine Osmond. Ken Roman's books on David Ogilvy are phenomenal, by the way. And one thing that I found fascinating about him is that he started off as a salesman, David Ogilvy, selling the Aga cooker. And I'm a brand owner and an entrepreneur, and when I work with people in your industry, they don't always think like an owner or like a salesperson. How can we do that and get you guys to think that way?
Absolutely. Well, so people ask me, is there any value in getting an MBA if you're in advertising? Actually, not that much, but you do learn to see everything in the context of a business. And I think that has been enormously valuable to me throughout my career. Because at the end of the day, people go, how are we going to judge whether this program is good or whether the advertising is working? And I go, there's only one measure. That is sales. Do we sell anything? And that's why I say you always have to ask a bigger question. And so the other thing is that I find clients don't always pin the responsibility for sales on their communications and agency partners. They should. You should start off always by saying, what I really want to do is double my sales. Now let's talk about how we're going to do that. And there's got to be a customer journey. There has to be a set of hypotheses that you have as the agency about how what you're doing is actually going to increase sales. Because at the end of the day, if the sales don't go up, you really are not of much value. I don't care how many awards you win at Cannes, or it's really at the end of the day, it's about moving a client's business. Now, our deeply held belief is strong brands and great communication will, in fact, sell goods and services. But if it's not working, then you got to go back and refine and do what's necessary. The other thing is, it's much more fun for an agency if you actually feel that you have some measure of sales results. And when we were doing Motorola in China, they used to have a meeting at 8:15 every morning at the agency where they go through the sales results from the day before. They get daily sales results. The agency, not at the same time as the clients did. And they know what was selling and what wasn't selling. And after the report, there would be a half-an-hour conversation with the client on what was going to be adjusted, what more was needed, what had to be done to get the sales to where they needed it to get to. That was the happiest, most motivated, most focused account group that we had within Ogilvy at the time. But involve your agency partners. Make them responsible. Make them accountable. They should be anyway, but just in case they're not. We sell our house, right? We sell our house, absolutely.
Hi, I have a question. My name is George, and I'm in product management career that I've shared with you some time ago. Did you ever have to fire a client, and if so, why?
Yes. I actually, on a few occasions, but not, so only one time in my career did I say, we can't actually work for you because you want us to say something that's not true. One time. So everyone thinks that's extraordinary. In a 40-year career, because everyone thinks it happens, people on the outside, thinks it happens every 3 weeks, right? That you're asked to do something. So one time. But I've had to fire clients because of conflicts more than anything else. I've had to fire clients because we have one client who's now made an acquisition or is going into new territory, and it creates a conflict with a client that we have. That's very painful. That's actually awful. And you have to that's a very hard judgment to make. And you have to have a conversation with everyone at the agency and make sure when we won IBM, we had to part company with Microsoft and with Compaq in Europe. And those were very hard conversations. But IBM's ambition was so much greater, and our assignment potentially was so much greater than those two other clients, that we had to make this really tough decision. Actually, if you see Steve, if I'm in a room with Steve Ballmer, he says, that woman fired me. So, and I don't feel good about it, but at least we both smile. So it was great.
And just building on that for a second, how important is one of the things that we look at in new business when we're deciding whether or not to pitch is the cultural compatibility. And how important is that, whether it's clients that you work with and then you kind of realize maybe their corporate culture isn't as strong as it needs to be for us to do good work?
No, it's very, very important. And in so many of the instances where we had to fire a client, it was because we had very close working relationships with the client who was expanding. And we knew how well we worked together, and there had been a history of decades in some instances where we had worked so well together, and we were their partners. And versus in some of these other instances where we decided to part company, we were just really doing ads for some other people. Yeah. So these are not judgments. These are really tough calls to make.
Hi, I'm Laurie Peterson, and knowing what you do now, I'm over here.
Okay, sorry.
Knowing what you do now, are there 3 things you would do differently?
No, actually, I mean, I'm not sounding like Edith Piaf, but it's no. I think that I wish I had the perspective I have now to enjoy some things more than I did. There were some incredible moments, exciting moments of triumph and stuff where you go, okay, that's good. I now have to get on and do something else. So not really. Although I always say I would have had a 4th child probably if I had spaced it better. So.
Oh yeah, I'm curious. Could you elaborate more about this experience when you were 22 years old, when you first encountered the idea of being a marketing? What is it that really captured your imagination about it?
I think it's one of the great intellectual puzzles of all time to figure out how you can persuade people of something. How you can present something to someone in a certain way that you pique their interest, that you get them to open their minds to a new view, and that you can actually persuade them that they ought to take some action. It's all about sort of how people think, the influence of others. One of the things that is absolutely fascinating to me, and this I did learn from direct marketing, you can do some small things. You can change the color on a letter. You can create more white space around the place where you're supposed to put a signature, and your response would increase by 20%. Well, if you're curious, and I am infinitely curious, too curious, you don't just accept it. You start to think, why? What is it about more white space that makes people more ready to respond? Because there's a clue in that about everything, presumably. And so, to me, it was this great intellectual puzzle. You didn't have to just speculate, you could test. And this was another great thing, is you could try 10 things because it was relatively easy and one of them was going to work. And then you could take what worked and then refine it more. And so it was a game of refinement. And I'm just fascinated by that. I am still. I was in a meeting this morning where someone was taking apart the messaging of the presidential candidates. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to think the way some things are being positioned, who responds to it, why they respond to it, what is it that's driving people to think this way. And so I think that's really at the very heart of marketing. Even pricing is messaging. When you think about it, when you set a price point, it's. I remember when we first did the American Express Platinum Card, Jim Robinson, who was the CEO, it was $350 at the time. That's where they had priced it. And Jim said, "Oh, that's a shame. If you priced it at $1,000, you'd sell twice as many." Now, just think about that. So even pricing was messaging. What's the packaging like? What's the, I've got this whole thing on packaging. I think it's the most important ad space that exists. And we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the packaging. What can you say on it? What message can be inside it? It's a great game to me. It's a great puzzle. And where you can also measure results.
I think we have time for
Shelly, you and David Ogilvy talked about it's the most important thing is the people, which means that you're really got to hire well, which means you got to interview well. And I'd love to know when you're interviewing how you know if you want to hire that person. Like, do you have any tricks?
Well, first of all, it's not about, kind of the classic questions and all that. To me, it's a measure of intellectual curiosity and acuity. Because I think people who are successful in advertising are inherently curious and they ask good questions and they never accept the pat answer. They go deeper and broader. And you can use anything around you to test for that. I mean, I have a lot of frogs in my office. You can see the way people kind of ask about that, and are they curious, and how do they come at it? So sort of anything can get you there, but it's having them talk about the marketing strategy for Visa that'll tell you a little bit. The second thing is passion. I mean, the people who are successful are people of passion about, not necessarily even about advertising, but people who just can emote, who feel strongly about things, who won't take no for an answer, who drive, who care. And that you can also test just by having a cup of coffee and seeing how people react. There were two people within Ogilvy who used to have a measure of how good an account person was by how you would go to the client company with this person, and the way the receptionist greeted that person would tell you all you needed to know about how involved they were. There were people at Ogilvy who would go into a client's office and the receptionist would stand up and actually hug them. So happy to see them again. Because they had become part of that company. And they cared about everybody in that company. And so how do you get a sense of whether someone has the potential to be that involved and that engaged? That's what I'm always thinking about when I'm interviewing someone.
So we're out of time. Thank you, Shelly.